Hey everyone, Sarah at Nova again. And this week we are talking about a very special to me bike. A, because it's mine, but B, because it is in fact a special machine. What this is a 60 something, I'm not even sure of the exact year, Yetman framed Honda 305 or CB77 race bike. Story goes, in 1965, a man named David Yetman was working for a company in Beverly, Massachusetts, our fair state of Massachusetts, doing a company that did Formula V race car chassis. And Formula V racing was VW motors and other chassis that you put together. The idea was it was affordable four-wheel racing and stuff like that. Anyway, he was a young engineer for them. He owned a Honda Superhawk CB77, and he had an accident with one. He ran into a car, bent and broke the frame, and he couldn't afford to buy a new frame from Honda. So he said, "Well, I got technology, I got engineers around me. I have a space to work." And he went and he designed himself a new frame for it. And this is the resulting thing. This was the first version of the frame. It's called a space frame. It is all very lightweight, triangulated, plain steel tubing. Nothing fancy about the material used here. Very thin, almost like a bicycle. Very thin steel tubing. All the joints are brazed together, not welded, or some of them may be bronze welded, but there's no steel welding going on here. And you can see it's just a bunch of very little tubes. Like the Honda Superhawk, like the stock one, the engine is used as a stressed member, but unlike the Superhawk, it's required, meaning if you took the engine out and you sat on this frame, you would actually break the frame because it's that fragile, and it's that dependent on not its own structure perhaps, but its own the structural relationships between all the components. So it's kind of cool. This frame weighs about 8 pounds, whereas the stock frame weighed about 34 pounds. So significant weight savings. And yeah, Yetman went on. They built about 160-ish of these, some street versions, some race versions. And then he went on to have a catalog of racing components. It lasted at least 10 years, I think, into the mid 70s, perhaps even late 70s. They had a series of there was a Ducati frame, there were Yamaha frames, there were a series of stuff. The other one, at least as far as I'm aware, that he was known for was actually a Harley Sportster drag bike frame, which looked nothing like this. It didn't have this same kind of tubular triangulation going on, but was an upgrade from the Harley frame and did really good on drag racing. So definitely a period piece. I stumbled across this. Somebody I knew somebody who had it, and I walked into their shop and saw it, and I had to have it. And he was selling it, so I bought it. And this was actually my first race bike. I put it together, and the motor is stock CB77. It's 305cc, parallel twin, 180-degree crank. I did a little porting on the heads. I kept the valve size the same. At one point, I was running some period Harman Collins roller rocker camshaft with more aggressive cams on it and rollers on the lifters, on the rockers, excuse me. And then one of those rockers ate it during a race, and now we're back to a standard rockers on it. But it's not terribly breathed on, and it goes okay. I'm actually running Amol carbs on here, these are off a Brit bike. Reason I'm doing that is these are, if you ever had a Brit bike, they're not the most well-mannered carbs for a street bike. They're terrible on the bottom end. They're very rudimentary. But as far as your high RPM flow goes, it's pretty hard to beat them. They're just big holes that just take a lot of air, take a lot of fuel, and if you're just trying to keep the revs up, they actually work really well. So that was one update. The pipes, I don't even know what they are. The headers I got with it, the mufflers I bought, and you can see I've modified them through use, flattened out a little bit. Bike has been down a couple of times, and as well as some certain corners and certain tracks, the pipes just get dragged through it, and they get reshaped from that. A couple of speed holes in the side cover, mostly completely useless, but I like the look of it. And in racing, the feeling that you're getting lighter and going faster is sometimes as important. At least in vintage racing, it is. The front end is a CB550. This is not what this would have had back in the 60s. We took some parts off our parts shelf. We chose that because 35 millimeter is the max diameter for period 1 racing classes, and so we want to get as thick as we can. So originally this was a disc brake type of fork. So the lowers where the brake mounts is actually mounted to where the caliper would have mounted, and you have a special little bracket I made to hold it all there. That's a Honda CB450 drum brake, which is a pretty effective 2-leading shoe brake. This one has been also drilled, and that's for lightness as well as for cooling. And the rim is, I don't know if that's an Excel or something. I think the rim is something I bought from somebody. And the rear matches, so non-shouldered. I tend to like shouldered rims on my race bikes, but I can't always, beggars can't always be choosers. So these are non-shouldered, but aluminum, so they're much lighter than the standard CB77 steel ones would have been. This is kind of cool. The Honda CB77s came with sort of a rear set option. The rear foot pegs would have been put on there, and the front foot pegs would have been put on there on the stock bike. But it gives you the option of actually, you see how these are toothed. You can move these around and put them in different positions. And I just have the stock shift lever flipped upside down to reach back this far, which makes GP shifting, which you want anyway. So that's 1 up and 3 down. It's a 4-speed gearbox on this bike. Let's see, as far as the gearbox goes, the other thing
Ridiculous.
Where was I?
I don't know. You were at the back.
Well, what was the last thing I said? Can you see that? So speaking of the gearbox, nice cut there, Todd. What I did on this is it's called Xing the second and the third gears. And what you do is you take the second and third gear from the second gear and the third gear from the lay shaft and main shaft, and the second and third gear from the lay shaft, getting it all mixed up. And then you literally swap them in an X pattern. So this one goes here and this one goes there, and vice versa. And what that does is it brings the second and third gears closer, so it's a cheater close ratio gearbox. It helps, but the 4-speed is really a limiting factor on racing this bike. And when I actually stopped racing this bike, because I was getting beat by 2-strokes that had 6-speed gearboxes, and this little 4-stroke with a 4-speed gearbox was not really cutting it. Now I bought myself a 2-stroke with a 6-speed gearbox. I still got beat for a couple of years until I really kind of ride that, and then got fast enough on that. So a lot of speed is in your mind, but the equipment is also important. You can buy a 5-speed gearbox from this for this company from Nova, of all places, Nova UK. A transmission company. They only do racing transmissions. They make some really cool stuff, but it's not cheap, so you gotta really want it. You can build these bikes to be incredibly competitive, but it's a lot more expensive than, say, a Honda CB350, which is just a generation after this. So if you're gonna be racing one, you have to really want it, or really want to race period 1, because CB350s are not period 1 bikes. So up until 67, 68 is the cutoff for period 1. So you can make these really competitive, but you have to get board out to a full 350, get a 5-speed gearbox, amongst other things, hot cams, big valves, etc. Speaking of the CB350, this is in fact the precursor. The CB77 is a precursor to the CB350 and shares a lot of the same architecture. 180-degree crank, as I said, single overhead cam, chain driven cam draft, central cam change of the camshaft. So, you can see this got this beautiful slope to it. The CB350 obviously is vertical, but this came first, and they learned a lot from this, and then went on and moved on to the CB350s. If you're a fan of Italian bikes, you may notice the shape of the CB77 motor, just as a side point. That's the Laverda 750. I copied this bike almost exactly, although they made it into obviously a 750, not a 305. But that's one of the stories I love about international motorcycle culture is, when the Japanese were getting started, an Italian company called Mondial shared one of their engines with Soichiro Honda, and he copied a lot of it and learned a lot of it and basically reverse engineered a lot of it. And then 10, 15 years later, you have the Italians taking Hondas and reverse engineering them in the form of the Laverda, and Benelli took the 500 Honda 4 and made their 500 Quattro, as well as their 750 6-cylinder and 900 6-cylinder based on the Honda 4. So this back and forth stuff is pretty cool. I love it. Let's see, what else about this thing? You might notice this back tire is terrible. This is actually one we just put on for display, and we are going to take it off and put some real race rubber on it soon. We don't plan on racing this bike this season.
What kind of race rubber?
We're going to put on some Heidenau race rubber, as we are now the suppliers for Heidenau in the Heidenau race tires in the United States. But the reason we have this bike down we have it up on the wall here. You can see our lift was here that we took it down from. We're taking this bike to the Hand-Built show in Texas next week. So 10 days from now, this bike will be, actually less than 10, a week from now, this bike will be parked in Austin, Texas, along with my Yamaha TD1B racer. So we figured we'd bring some, rather than some custom bikes, we're working on a couple, but none of them we really wanted to show. We figured we haven't brought our race bikes to a show yet, so let's bring some race bikes and see what that kind of generates, because they are custom bikes. I actually put down as the builder on this bike David Yetman's name first, and then myself, because he clearly designed it. I don't want to take any credit for the chassis, but I had a hand in making the rest of it go. Yeah, so if you know anything about these bikes, or if you have, there's a whole era of 60s and 70s custom frames where people were doing really cool stuff. I mean, obviously in the history of motorcycling, there's custom frames throughout. It didn't start in the 60s and 70s. But there was a period of time in the 60s and early to mid 70s where aftermarket frame manufacturers were really doing cool stuff. The Rickman brothers in the UK, Colin Seeley in the UK, obviously David Yetman here, Rob North, who was in the UK and then in California. And I really love that part of it, because we got to a point in engine design where the engines were good enough, and the real magic was making them handle. So yeah, Yetman was one example of it. I had the opportunity. So if you're keen on these things, you'll notice this plate right here is not supposed to be here. Now it is here because I took this bike to New Jersey Motorsports Park as part of a Moto America sort of promotional thing, where we took out Period 1 bikes in front of the Moto America show, Moto America race. And we were sort of, the old bikes were putting on a show. We did a race. It was sort of serious, not that serious. But that's a pretty long track. And during the race, I came back and I noticed that I had a little line here. And I thought it was a zip tie or something. Did I leave a zip tie? I looked at it like this. And I looked closer and I realized, no, it was cracked. My whole frame had cracked. Actually, it was on the other side. It had cracked there, and it was starting to crack over here. And I said, well, hell, what am I going to do with that? And funnily enough, a guy named Tony Full, who's another chassis builder that I didn't mention my first go around. Tony Full, who was very critical in making the 70s Japanese very powerful engine bikes actually handle on the racetrack. He was there racing a bike, and then a guy named Frank Camilleri was also there. And Frank used to work with David Yetman, building some of these other chassis. And they both came over and they looked at it with me, and I was just feeling like I'm in the awe of, I'm in the presence of gods here. And then they said, that can be fixed. And another guy who I was pitted next to had a welder, and so we found this piece of sheet steel, and he just put it on there, and I've left it there ever since, because as Frank Camilleri said, this is a good frame, but the tubing was just a little too thin. One size bigger, and it would have all been okay. And so, 60 years after the fact, I'm racing it still, and it happened to crack. So I'm not mad at it. But yeah, that was a little upgrade. Otherwise, it's been stock. You can see it's been upside down before. It's got its battle scars, but it holds together, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's a long way of saying, if you have any experience with these things, or you're into aftermarket frames, or you have frame knowledge, or just like them, chime in the comments. I always love to hear that. And yeah, if you've never heard of David Yetman before, go look him up. Very interesting guy. And this kind of innovation is what makes the privateer motorcycle racing world, and even just the custom world, just so interesting. So yeah. So thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. It does help. And we'll see you next time, or maybe we'll see you in Austin.